Hello and welcome to my first ever tutorial. And I am doing a tutorial. I'm going to put a picture across the screen while I'm talking. This blanket was designed for Boggy Creek, and I used the Granny Merge shawl, which is a tutorial and pattern by Fiber Spider. I used his idea in the shawl and converted it to a square for this blanket. And so I am going to do this tutorial on how to construct this entire blanket. So here is, I can't get the whole blanket in my screen, but here is one of the squares. And I'm going to start by showing you how to make one of these squares that is based on the Granny Merge shawl. So I'm going to just adjust the camera here a little bit. Hang on. Great. And I'm going to move this blanket out of the way. And I'm going to use a different color of yarn. That blanket was done with an ombre yarn that changed color, but I'm going to use a solid pale blue yarn to build the square. Later, after the square has been completed, you will see that I use that blanket to show you the other parts of it, the construction of the blanket itself. I didn't, excuse me, I didn't want to make 4 whole new squares and a whole other second blanket. So I just decided I would make one square in a plain color to show you how to make it. And I used the actual blanket as I completed it to show you the other steps to finish the construction. So you can use whatever yarn you want. Most are using a 3 or a 4 weight yarn for these blankets. I have here, I don't even know what it is, but it's probably either a Pound of Love. I think that's Pound of Love is Lion brand, or it could be Karen's. A Pound of Love is Karen. I don't know. It's one of those two. And I am using, it's wearing off here. I'm using a 5.5, there it is. I'm using a 5.5 millimeter Furls hook. I really like my Furls hooks. I crochet a little different than most. So I'm gonna put this down just a wee bit farther. Okay. Hopefully this is focused so that you can see what I'm doing. I hope that's not too much glare from the overhead light. But I have used a slip knot to put this on my hook. And this starts out like a basic granny square, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So this is, now there are many ways to do a granny square, but this is the way I do it. If you want to adopt it, feel free to do what works for you. But I start with chaining up 3. No, I think I chained 4. Chain 4, and then go back in the very first and do a slip stitch, to form your circle. And so we have a circle in here, and we're going to go into that circle. First, we're going to chain up 3, and that counts as our first double crochet. And this is going to be a lot of double crochets. So there's our first chain of 3, and then I'm going to do that often comes loose. You can always tighten that first stitch. So I'm going to do 2 double crochets next to that chain of 3. So there we have our first cluster. Then I'm going to chain 2, and then I'm going to do 3 more double crochets to make another cluster. And I hope I stay in the frame. I have a tendency to move a lot to move my hands a lot when I am crocheting. Sorry about that. So now we have a second cluster. I'll just tighten that up a bit. Then we're going to chain 2 again. And we need another cluster of 3 double crochets. I'm assuming those watching this do know the basics of crochet, that you know a chain, a single crochet, a double crochet. We're only going to use chains and double crochets in this entire thing. So there's 3 more double crochets in a cluster. Chain 2 again, chain 2. And once more, we need our 4th side. We're going to do another cluster of 3 double crochets. Then we are going to chain 2 because we need another corner. And we are going to slip stitch into the top of this chain 3. So we're going to slip stitch into the top. And so what we have here now is 4 sides of our granny square, and each side has a cluster of 3 double crochets. Now, some people do a granny square by then turning it around and continuing the other direction. And in some ways, that would make for a very nice square. Some people say it keeps the square aligned better. I was taught, and so that's what I'm going to do here. But if you know how to make a granny square and you have a way you like to do it, feel free to continue doing it. But I'm going to show you the method that I have always made granny squares. Very, very first thing I ever made was a granny square poncho. So we need to get over to this corner to start the next round. So I am going to slip stitch into this stitch over here. I'm going to slip stitch into there. And I'm going to slip stitch into the space. So now I'm over at this space here. And I'm going to start the second round. And this granny square starts with 3 rounds and then it changes. So for this round, I'm going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Then I am going to do 2 double crochets. And 2. I'm a little slower working here under the camera, and I hope I stay in the frame so you can see everything I do. After we finished our cluster, we have to chain 2. And then we're going to do, in that same space, we're going to do 3 more double crochets. So there's 1, there's 2, and there is 3. So we've put 2 in that corner space, and that becomes the corner of the next round. Then you're just going to chain 1 and go to the next corner, and we're going to do basically the same thing in that corner. We're going to do 3 double crochets, chain 2, and do 3 more double crochets, all in that same space. 3 more double crochets. All right, so that finishes that corner. Now we're going to chain 1 and go to the next corner. Same thing. 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets. Chain 2 and 3 more double crochets. Now this is a pattern that you can do in a variety of ways, and I do talk about a lot of different variations and color combinations that you can try a little later in the tutorial. So I have my corner done again. 3, 2 chains and 3 double crochets. Once more, I'm going to chain 1 and go across to this last corner, and once again do 3 double crochets, 3 double crochets, chain 2, and another 3 double crochets. Then we're going to, we finished that corner, we're going to do a single crochet chain. We're going to do 1 chain to get us across this space, and then again we're going to go into the top of this chain 3 space, and we're going to do a slip stitch. And once again, there is our square. Now we have 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets in each corner. We have 1 more round to do, and in order to do it, we need to get ourselves into that corner again. So once more, I'm going to slip stitch in the next stitch and slip stitch into the corner. All right. Now, I'm going to get you started on the third round, and I'm sure a lot of you following this tutorial know how to do this basic granny square. So once again, we're going to do like we did in the last round. We're going to chain up 3. We're going to do 2 more double crochets so that we have our cluster of 3. There they are. I have to slide that over a bit so they're together. We have our cluster of 3. Then we do a chain 2, and we do 3 more double crochets. Now, in this next round, we're going to have some spaces that aren't corners. First round was all corners. So we're going to do a chain 1, then we're going to go into this space between the clusters on the side, and we're going to do 3 double crochets. That's all. My yarn is wanting to do something else. Okay. So start again. We're doing 3 double crochets into this chain space. And once you have your cluster done, that's on the side, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to go into the corner space and do our cluster of 3 double crochets, chain 2, and then another cluster of 3 double crochets. So there's chain 2 and a cluster of 3 double crochets. Now, I'm not going to have you sit here and watch me go all the way around, because I'm quite sure that most of you have done a granny square, and even if you haven't, I think you can see what's happening. So I'll join you at the end of the round. What you're going to do is this. You're going to chain 1 and do a cluster on the side. Then you'll chain 1 and do your corner, which is 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. Then you chain 1 and do 1 cluster on the side, and then chain 1 and go to the next corner, do the same as in the other corners. Chain 1, go to the side, do a cluster, chain 1, and I will meet you back around on this side. All right, we're back around here. Almost done the third round, and we're going to do a chain 1, and once again we're going to slip stitch into the top of this chain 3 that we started with, and then we're going to slip stitch across until we get to the corner. Now, if we can show it on the original block, the original squares that I made, you'll see that we have a granny square at the center, then we have some solid, and then we go to granny squares again and more solid. And the basis of the granny merge shawl is alternating rows of granny square clusters and solid rows, and you are encouraged to do whatever number of rows of each you like. In this particular case, since we're only getting to a certain size, we're going to do 3 rows of each. So we have done 1, 2, 3 rows of our granny squares or clusters. Now we're going to switch over and do 3 rows of solid double crochets. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Now we're going to start out, as we did before, doing a chain of 3. Then we're going to do 1 more double crochet. Then we're going to, I like to tighten them up at the beginning. Then we're going to do 2 chains, chain 2, and then we're going to do 2 more double crochets. And this signifies the difference between the 2 styles. In the granny square cluster, there's always 3, chain 2, 3 in the corner. But in the solid row, there's 2 double crochets, chain 2, 2 double crochets, 3 and 2. And that signifies the change to the solid row. Now, next thing we're going to do is a double crochet in every stitch across, and that includes the double crochets and the chain space. The first double crochet is the one you got to go looking for because it is sort of lost under all this corner stuff. But there is a stitch to go into here. It looks like you're going into the corner space, but you're going into an actual stitch on the row. So we're going to double crochet in every one of these stitches going across. And while I'm doing that, I want to point out that although I did say this was a tutorial, and I am going to do, see, there's your 2 in the corner, and then there's the 3 stitches of the cluster. Then you're going into the chain space with 1 stitch, and then your next stitch is right there. 1, 2, oops, 2, come here. Sometimes, and guess what? It just split the yarn. I don't know why it does that, but anyhow. And there's the 3rd one. And then we're going to do 1 in the chain space. Oh, I'm all fingers today. And then we're going to do the next cluster of 3, starting with this one right here. 1, 2, 3. And that brings us to the corner space again. And in that corner space, as before, we're going to double crochet 2, 1, 2. We're going to chain 2 and double crochet 2 more. 2 more double crochets. And I'm going to stop at this point and have you look at this row across the top. And you always have an odd number. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. There are 15 going all the way across. And you have to have 15 stitches, including the corner ones, 15 on each side. So I'm not going to crochet all the way around here. That would get boring for you to watch. But just remember, your first stitch is here, sort of in the corner space. you start your double crochets. And what I started to tell you earlier is, although I am going to be thorough with the square, almost like a tutorial, after that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and do this like a recipe. I'm going to explain the steps that are needed, but I'm not going to actually do every step. So I want you to crochet down the 4 sides. Remember this one right here. The ones in the beginning are the ones that sometimes are missed. And make sure that you have the 15 that I had on every side. And remember, 2, chain 2, 2 in the corner space. And I'll meet you back around at the end of the round. So we're coming around to finishing up on this final side. And here's where you have to be a little bit careful. And it's a little bit harder. So make sure you have counted your stitches on every side. There must be 15. I'm going to count these to show you. There were 2 at the beginning. And then 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. We need to do 3 more in the space over this cluster. Now that sounds pretty straightforward, but the problem is that when you finished up the previous round, you finished here and you had to slip stitch across to get to this corner space. So these stitches are a little harder to see or to find and to get into them. So I'm going to go into here, and there's 2 layers because of the slip stitches to get across. So I've done this one, then the next one. This is a little bit tricky too. And then finally, this last one in here. And I'm not really sure if I'm getting in a whole stitch. Sometimes because this is over top and this is loose from the other, sometimes I go under these. See these 2 that make this stitch? That's the slip stitch over and above the stitch that's underneath it. So I go under those 2 like that. And then I'm able to make my stitch. And then I'm going to slip stitch into the top of that chain, slip stitch. And then we're only going to have to really do 1 more slip stitch to get into the corner. Now, you have to do 2 more rounds of solid, and they will be done exactly as you did this one. And I'll get you started. You're going to chain 3. Some might just chain 2. I think I've done that as well. Because sometimes that chain 3 is just a little bit taller than your double crochet. So it's whatever you're used to doing. So we have 2 double crochets. Then we chain 2. 2 more double crochets. I think you can hear my furry friend. Didn't finish this stitch. So 1 double crochet, another double crochet, and now we're going to start again in that first stitch that sometimes gets hidden, and we're going to double crochet all the way across to the other side and do 2 more in the chain space corner. Now, we had 15 in the previous row. This time, you'll increase it by 4, so there'll be 19 in the row and on each side. So you'll just work down here as we did the last. And again, I'm going to leave you to do that on your own. And this round and the next round are identical. So I'm going to leave you to do this next round, keeping in mind you're going to get 19 stitches across to this corner. You'll do 2, chain 2, 2, 19 on each side. Come back around here, and here's where you have to be careful, where you slip stitch. So make sure on this last round that you count that you get 19 in the next row. And then you're going to do one more row the exact same way. You're going to chain up, do your corner as I just did this corner, and go all the way around. And 4 more means that your third round will have 23 double crochets in the solid row. And I'm going to leave you to do those 2 rounds and not sit and watch me double crochet all the way around. And I'll join you when we come back to this point in the next round. So good luck with that. 19 in each row this time, and 23 in each row the next time. Okay, we have come all the way around to join up back to the beginning, and I hope you took the time to double check the count of your stitches in every row going around. And this last row had 23 double crochets from one corner to the other corner, and it's very important that you have the right number. So we have slip stitched, and now we're doing a chain 3 like we always do in the corner. 1, 2, 3. Now we're going back to doing, now that we've finished 3 rows of solid, we're going back to doing granny clusters. So that means we have to do 2 more double crochets. So that we have a cluster of 3 together. Then we're going to chain 2. And then we're going to do 3 more double crochets. Now, the next step is getting the double crochet clusters placed right. So what you're going to do first is chain 1. Always put a chain between the clusters. Then you're going to skip 3. And remember, this hidden one is a stitch. So 1, 2, 3, and you're going in the 4th stitch, and you're doing a double crochet, and then you're going to do 2 more in the exact same stitch. So there's another granny cluster right there, cluster of 3 double crochets. Then you're going to chain 1, and again you're going to skip 3, 1, 2, 3, and you're going to do another cluster in the 4th space, the 4th stitch, 3 double crochets. Chain 1 after you've done your 3. Then you're going to skip 1, 2, 3, and you're going to go in this 4th stitch, and again you're going to do 3 double crochets. You can see this whole thing is about double crochets. You'll really know how to make a double crochet when you're finished this blanket. So we got 3 in that space, chain 1, and now we count 1, 2, 3, and go in the 4th. And again, do 3 double crochets. chain 1. Then we're skipping 3 again. 1, 2, 3, and we're going in the 4th stitch right here and doing a double crochet. We're doing 3 of them. And this is why the count is important. We're going to skip 3, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to, the 4th one is that corner space. And that's where we're going to make the 3 double crochet cluster. We're going to chain 2 and then another cluster of 3. And we're going to continue down this side in the same way we did the first side. So you're going to skip 3, and remember there is a stitch right here. 1, 2, 3, and then we go in the 4th right here. So I'm going to stop at this point. So you can see you're doing a row of clusters like you're used to. Now, another way you can double check that things are falling together properly is if you look back at the last row of granny clusters, we had 1, 2, 3 clusters in a row. There's the corners. Now, if we had continued, there would be 4 in this row, 5 in this row, and 6 in this row. So the row we just did should have 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 clusters in this row. And of course, your spaces of 3 have to work out. The next row around, because we are going to now do 3 rows going around. This one has 7, the next will have 8, and the third one will have 9. So you're going to continue going around just the way you did in the beginning. You're going to do your granny clusters, counting 3, going in the 4th, all the way around. If your numbers are right, it will work out correctly for the points. You're going to go all the way around, and when you get over to this side, you're going to chain 1 and slip stitch into this, chain 1 and slip stitch into this top of this chain. Then you'll slip stitch over to the corner and continue on and do 2 more rounds after this one. So you have to continue going around this by doing 3 double crochets in the stitch. 3 double crochets in the stitch. Oh, sometimes things don't slide the way you want. Three double crochets in the stitch. Chain 1, skip 3, 1, 2, 3, and go in the 4th one, and again put 3 double crochets in there and continue around the side until you get to the corner, and in the corner you'll do your 3, chain 2, 3, and then go down the side the way I am until you get all the way around to the beginning again, slip stitch, and do 2 more rows exactly the same. But the next row, of course, you're going to be jumping from space to space to space, doing a cluster, chain 1, a cluster, chain 1, a cluster, until you get 3 rows. So I'll meet you back at the end of the 3 rows of granny clusters, and we'll see what comes next. So here we are again, coming around to the finish line where we're going to do one more cluster of double crochets, 3 double crochets in the space. Then we'll do a chain 1, and we will connect to the top of those chains, do a slip stitch, and then we will slip stitch our way over to the corner space, just like we've been doing every row. I should say every round, I guess. And now we're in the corner, and we have just finished 3 rounds of granny clusters. And at this point, we go back to the solid, and we do it exactly the way we did it the last time. I'll get it started. And then this is where the detailed, I hope it was detailed, tutorial ends and the recipe begins. So I've done, remember, we only do 2, whoops, I'm a little too high. We only do 2 double crochets, chain 2, 2 more double crochets, and then we're ready to start the next row. And remember, there is that hidden stitch. You don't want to miss it. That hidden stitch right there. And then we do a stitch in every stitch, every previous double crochet in the previous row or round, and we do one in the chain space. And you'll go all the way down to the other end. My yarn needs to be pulled out. And this time, I'll show you how we know how many stitches you need on this side. On the very last solid row, we had 23. This row would have been 27, 31, 35. So there will need to be 39 stitches across this row. I'm not going to do the whole row while you watch. I'm sure it's not fun to just watch me sit and double crochet. Oops. So I am going to talk about how you're almost done this square. All right. Now I'm going to show you the original square, at least part of it, so you can see how the square is made. Here we are. Okay, we have just finished doing this granny section, and we're moving into the solid square, the solid stitches. Notice that if you are following my template of how to create these squares, you are now working on the solid stitches, and there are 2 rows of solid stitches. And then what I did was another row of solid, but I changed color. I picked black. You can pick whatever contrasting color you want. I did a row of that. Then I went back to my main color and did a row of that. All of this was solid. And then finally, I went back to the contrast color again and did another row of that. And I did it all the way around the square. And I did it for each square. So if you're following my template, in order to finish this square, you're going to do these 2 rows in whatever your main color is. Then you will switch to your contrasting color for 1 row, go back to your main color for 1 row, and again back to your contrasting color for 1 more row, all in solid colors, doing exactly what I did. 2 double crochets, 2 chain, 2 double crochets in the corner, and then solid double crochets all the way around. And every row will have 4 more stitches than the previous row. Now, you do not need to follow my template. If you want to just do the square and end without what I call this border highlight, if you don't want to do that, then what I would suggest is that instead of 2 rows right here, you do 3 rows, and then you could be done and forget the extra highlight around the edge. The other thing, and I talk about this later, another way this blanket could be done using this pattern is to continue doing granny cluster, solid, granny cluster, solid, until this square is as big as you want it to be. And in the case of the Boggy Creek blanket, it would be 40 inches. Well, you would stop a little before that because, of course, there has to be a border. And if you are going to make it just 1 big square, I would suggest you continue with 3 rows of granny, 3 rows of solid, 3 rows of granny, and keep going, 3 rows of solid, and so on as far as you want to go. That's your choice. This, like I say later, a lot of different things can be done with this pattern to make it your own blanket, your own creation, using colors in the way you want to use them. And I talk about that a little more further on in the tutorial. Now, the rest of the tutorial is going to switch gears and become more like a recipe. So when you finish the squares, if you're following my pattern, once you finish the squares in this way, in this manner, I will be back to show you the next steps. And the next steps involve joining the squares. I talk about and show you how to join the 2 squares side by side. Then I talk about putting a border on the top, a border on the bottom, and also a fair bit of, you can't see it, but I put rows in the middle between the top and the bottom. I joined the top strip to the bottom strip, and then I did a border going around it. And that is still yet to come. I talk you through all of those steps in the rest of this tutorial. So I hope you're able to finish this square. And when you get the square finished the way you want it to be, then you can come back and see what the next steps are to continue on with this blanket. All right, once you have made your 4 squares, it is then time to join them. And you have to join them in 2 rows. Now, I've laid out the 4 of them the way I think I want them to go. I really like this color and this together. And I think I like these 2 side by side. So that leaves this one left over. So we don't need all 4 of them here. And I am going to take some of your suggestions on extra to put in it. But for right now, I'm just going to move these 2 out of the way. And we're going to concentrate on these two. Now, just give me a minute to focus down in closer so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, here we are. And we want to put these two seams together. And they're rather large, and I won't do the entire seam, that's for sure. But I want to use something called the mattress stitch. And in looking it up, I saw a couple different ways to do it. But the first thing is you want to get enough yarn that is 3 times the length of your seam. So I need to cut me some yarn, and I'm one of these people that always allows more. So I have my black yarn, and it is my hope that this won't be too obvious of a seam. There are easier ways to do it. I would find doing it with a crochet hook to be much simpler, doing single crochet or slip stitch, whatever. But I want to try and make them as invisible as I possibly can. So I saw a way where it says to go into the very bottom, go through the very bottom stitch in the corner and go through. Now at the beginning you're going to have a lot of yarn to pull back and forth. Make sure you leave a tail that gives you enough to weave it in later. And then you go over to the other side and you go into the bottom stitch. It's black, so this isn't the easiest thing to see, and I don't know if my focus is as good as it should be, but there we go. Then you are to go back into the same stitch and come out in the next one. Now, if you have a different way to seam it together, feel free. If you don't mind a ridge, fine, do it another way. I'm just trying to get mine as flat as I can. Now I'm going back into the same one and up to the next one. Pull it all through. Then you go into where you just did, I think I'm supposed to be on the front side, where you just did the last one and come up. Go into where the last one came up and then come up in the next one, the next stitch. And again, it's black, so it's hard to see, but you come up in the next stitch. Then you go over to the other side and you go into the last one there and you come up in the next stitch. And you do that all the way up. Go into the last one and come up in the next stitch. I hope it's bright enough. Black is not the best thing to be doing a tutorial with, but I didn't want to make a whole lot of other squares. I guess I could have just got 2 squares, 2 small squares of any kind and demonstrated this, but I think you're seeing what I'm doing. And again, there are probably a dozen different tutorials on the mattress stitch, and there's more than a dozen tutorials online about joining squares in any way that you want to do it. So I'm going to continue on this way using my mattress stitch. You go into the last stitch and come up in the next one. And I'm going to keep doing that all the way up. So I'm going to stop the video now, and I'll join you when I get near the top. Okay, I'm back. I'm almost to the end of this seam, and I just have a few more stitches to finish it off. I'm not really sure I'm going in the place I'm supposed to, but it's working out well, and I'm happy with it. So I'm going to finish it here. But one thing I neglected to say at the beginning is that this is called the mattress stitch, and every so often you're supposed, if you were doing 2 granny squares, you know, granny squares are maybe 4 or 5 inches wide, and you can wait till the end of the seam and do this. But this is a seam that's, I haven't measured it, but it's probably 16, 17 inches long, and you can't wait till the end. You're supposed to every so often pull on it and see how it pulls it up tight. Now, that's a bit tighter than I like, so I pull it back out just a teeny bit, but it pulls it in closer and neater. So you should do that, you know, every 3, maybe 4 inches, whatever's comfortable to you. You should be pulling it up tight. And I will do that once more when I get right to the very end. And I'm into the very last stitch. And I read somewhere in one of the comments to one of the channels that was showing this stitch that the person had watched this stitch done by many people, and nobody had shown how to end it off. Now, I don't know that I'm an expert, but I'm just going to go across and under to join one side to the other. And that makes it a bit snug right up there at the top. And the other thing we have to do at this point is to end it. And I'm going to take a little bit off of this. It's awful long. And we're going to end it. Tie in our ends. So I'm just going to wiggle back and forth through this seam that we've made here, trying to keep it on the back side of the work, and I will show it to you in a minute. And I have learned that if you go back and forth 3 times through your work, that you will make it secure and it isn't ever going to come out. So I always do that, even if it's a short space, even if I only have, say, 1 inch of a seam allowance kind of thing to weave back and forth. They say it doesn't matter how long, as long as you do it 3 times. Then I pull this a bit taut and I cut it as close as I can. And then I pull it back out a bit so that that tail is lost inside. And there we have snugged it off. And it is fairly straight. I did a better job on the other one. It pulled this a bit. But that is, excuse me, that is those 2 colors joined. And I also joined the other 2 colors when you weren't watching. And that's how it looks at the bottom. And on the back side, there is a little bit of a ridge, just a wee bit of a ridge, because you are going through the top side of those stitches. But you know, it's not that much. It doesn't poke up that much that it bothers me. And you know, you could press it with your fingers and that will flatten it down some. if you don't want a ridge in it. I like it to be flat when I make mine. So now we have to move on to the next stitch. We've got the 2 bottom squares joined, and we've got the 2 top squares joined. And I'm going to say this again. I said it at the beginning, and I want to make it very clear that this is not what I consider to be a full-on tutorial. I'm doing what I consider to be a recipe for this particular blanket. And by that, I mean, and I'll say it again if I said it at the beginning, I'm working on the premise that those watching are crocheters. They know the basics of how to do a slip knot and how to do a single crochet, a double crochet, how to do a slip stitch, and probably have done at some time in their life, have done a granny square. So it's like I don't have to go into all of the specifics. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go into all of the specifics. I just want to show you how this particular blanket has been put together. And you've already seen, I did go into detail with the squares so you would know how to do each of the rounds. But the rest of it is, you know, common knowledge as far as I'm concerned. I just want to tell you how I put the whole blanket together. So the next step in putting our blanket together is to put some rows at the top and bottom. Now, excuse me, I asked for ideas on my video last week, and there were several suggestions. I wanted to put black in the middle, and I have made 3 rows of black at the bottom of the one section, and I made 3 rows of black at the top of the other section, and I am going to join them together. But first I'm going to do a little bit more, and it was suggested that I put some rows of color at the top and bottom. And I did that the way that I understood they were telling me. And this is what it looked like. And here's a picture of what I did. And I felt that the rows were just too close to the squares. So I took it all out and I tried it a different way. And this is what I came up with. Now you can't see the whole row, but I think you can see that this is not as close. Here's my big square. And what I decided to do was put some rows of black next to the square. The 2 squares are attached here. And then after I did, I think I did 3 more rows of black, then I put rows of color black. And it was suggested that I do the 2 colors that were the opposite to the 2 squares. And I think I am kind of happy with that. I will look at it again when I get more done. But now is the point when we need to put these rows of color at the top, and this is at the top, and at the bottom. And I'm going to show you how to do just that. But I wanted to get one part done to make sure I was happy with it before I showed you how to do it. So that is the top of the blanket. In my mind, this pink is on the top left corner. So below it, I'm going to have the, I don't know what color it is, green, turquoise, something, with the blue beside it. So I have put 3 rows at the top of it. This will go in the middle of the blanket. I hope this all makes sense to you. But I want to put rows on the bottom. Right now, nothing is at the bottom. That's the end, the finish of the square. So first thing you have to do is make sure you're on the right side, and I am. I can tell by my seam that's the bottom, and we just finished doing the seams. This is the way it goes, and I'm going to work on the bottom. So I have to turn it around and start working on the far right corner where the green is. Now I'm going to show you how to get the first row onto the blanket, and it doesn't matter if you're doing the row at the top, the row at the bottom, the rows in the middle, they're all the same. And I'll show you how to proceed to put this row on, the first row and the beginning of the second, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. Now, the way I've been doing it is I do a slip knot, and then I go to the corner and I do a slip stitch into the corner. So there's our corner. And keep in mind, when we made this corner, we had 2 stitches going on this direction, chain 2, and 2 stitches going up. So I'm going to slip stitch into the corner just to attach my yarn. Now I'm working along this top side. Once again, we have black, but I think you can see my stitches. I hope it's focused. First thing I'm going to do is chain up 3. That's like making the first double crochet. Then I'm going to make a double crochet into the chain space. Double crochet. Then I have to double crochet across the row. And keep in mind, this first stitch is right here. See, there's a space right there. So I'm going to do a double crochet into that space. It looks like you're going in the chain, but it is a stitch that you're going into. See? Okay. So finish your double crochet, and then you just continue to double crochet all the way along this top edge. Now, I'm going to try to stitch and talk at the same time because I want to show you what to do in the middle. So I want to talk about this blanket, generally speaking. First of all, I think this is a very versatile blanket. You could do a number of other things with it. For example, if you wanted to make it a square blanket, you would not have to do any extra rows across the top or bottom like I'm doing, and you would not have to do any rows in the middle section. You could just join, after you join the 2 at the top and then the 2 at the bottom, you could take those 2 strips, the top and the bottom, and join them together and have a complete afghan, which probably you'd want to do a border, and I am going to show doing a border in a little bit. Another thing is, you don't have to use ombre. You could use plain colors, and you could do the whole thing 4 squares the same, or 2 solid squares and put two the same here and then 2 the same there. The other thing is, if you used baby yarn, it would be perfect in a square, and you could make the squares 4 different colors, 2 different colors, 1 color, and attach the squares. They would make a square, which is fairly typical for a baby blanket or Afghan. And again, these squares that I made here to start with, they can be any size you want. They could be small, especially if you're doing them in solid colors. They could be small, and you could attach as many as you want. The other thing about this particular square that I did, which I'm calling a granny merge square, it could just keep going, one square as big as you want to make it. And that could be the blanket. And that works for Boggy. They say the sweet spot is a 40-inch square. And you could do that with the actual square pattern I showed you at the beginning. And not all this extra borders and joining and all the rest. The other thing that I think would be very interesting in making this blanket is to do the different sections, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second here. I finished that stitch. You know that this granny merge has a granny square in the middle, then it has solids, then it has granny, and then it has solids. These sections I did 3 rows of each, 3 rows granny, 3 rows solid. You can do it 4 rows or 5 rows. You could also alternate colors. You could do the granny in one color and the solid in another color, and then go back to the granny color and the solid color. You don't have to do this alternating border. That's your choice. You can make this blanket your own. I'm showing you how I did this as a bit of a recipe, as I've said, so you can use it to create your own special blanket. Okay, so you're going to have a little patience and listen to me prattle a bit, because what I want to do is get to the middle to show you how to handle that. I know there would be some people that wouldn't be sure. I know there might be some people that are fairly novice crocheters and need a little instruction when something is slightly different. But I'm sure there are some of you out there that would have your own way to handle it, and that's fine. Anything you want to do differently, feel free. This is, like I said, it's a recipe, it's a suggestion, it's an idea of a different blanket to contribute to Boggy Creek. So I'm trying to quickly get my double crochets done. I don't want to mess up. And I have a big, I don't know if it's a Cairn 1 pound or a quarter pounder from, not quarter pounder. I love this yarn. No, it wouldn't be that. It could be Lion Brand's Pound of Love. I think that's what it's called. I don't know which it is because I took it out of my stash and it didn't have a ball band on it. I don't know what happened to it. I'm hoping I have enough yarn, especially since I've had to frog and that's wasted a little bit of yarn. And this takes a lot more yarn than you think, doing what I'm doing. But again, as I said, you don't have to do all these extras. But I really wanted to make this a rectangular blanket. And it was interesting, the number of people that told me that they believed a blanket should be rectangular as well. Young children, a square blanket would be fine. But when you get a little bit older, you need a little bit of length to cover. And they do have teenagers at Boggy Creek Camp. So I'm getting almost to this center here. And, okay. I think you can hear my little furry friend down there. He wants attention. When I come down here, he wants to be part of the show, but he can't get in this space. Okay, we're coming up to the center. There's the last stitch of the row, the actual stitch. Oops, I did something wrong there. And although I have a wool genie, I'm getting near the end of my big ball of yarn, and it's catching. You wouldn't believe the mess the inside of the ball is. Okay, so there's the last regular stitch. Now we're at the corner. There's the corner from the previous round. And I'm going to go in there and do only one stitch. I don't want to make this too bulky. And then you have, here is where the seam was. And I'm just going to poke my way in there the best that I can. If you make it too tight, it's hard. Mine aren't too tight. And I'm going to do a stitch there. Then I'm going to go to the next big chain space, the corner from the last round. And then, of course, as you know, there's the beginning stitch that looks like it's in the chain space, but there's where I'm going to make my next stitch. And then I'm going to keep on going across. And just before I stop, you can see it seems to be quite straight going across there. It isn't too bulky, but it looks like there's two in one spot, but there really isn't. So I'm quite happy with the way that seems to be lying. So I'm going to turn off while I finish. You don't want to listen to me for another 5 minutes. I'm going to turn off while I go across the row, and I'm going to meet you at the far outside edge. All right, I've come up to the end, and here is the last double crochet in an actual stitch. But again, I feel you have to go into this corner space. And again, my feeling is to really keep it lined up the best. One stitch is not enough. If you had been doing a round, you would have put 2 stitches in that space. So I'm going to put a second stitch in there. If you feel 1 is enough, that's fine. But if you look at it, it looks like it's lined up fairly nicely with this other edge. So I'm quite happy with doing it that way. Now, this is the first row, and I decided, and this was my decision, you can do something different, that I would put 3 rows of the black before I started to put the bands of color. So I am just going to chain up 3. This is just like doing any other multiple rows of stitching in double crochet, and I'm turning it over, and here we are with it turned over, and this is the first stitch, and I'm going to go in the next stitch right here and make a double crochet and double crochet all the way across this row. And there are no difficulties in stitching this row because there are no funny things happening. It's just a row of double crochets that you're working into. You took care of that middle spot in the last row, and everything will proceed in in regular fashion. If you make your stitches correctly, that is. Okay, now this thing is tight. Now, you don't want to sit and watch me double crochet for hours. What is going to happen here is I've done one row. I turned around, did a second row, and when I get back to the other edge, I will turn around and do a third row that will end up here. And I will end off my yarn at that point. Then I will take this out. We have to remember that we are working on, in my case, this is the bottom of the blanket. Now, first I want to say you should put whatever number of rows you want, but in my case it was 3. 3 rows here before you start the different colored bands. And the different colored bands will look like this. And every time you'll make sure that you are on the front side. And you can always tell, I can see I'm on the back side here because I have that ridge in the seam. So I would have to turn it over. To be on the front, I have to have this green color to my right. And I will start at this corner and I will do a row of pink. Then and it will end on the far side. Then I'll come back to this corner and I'll do a row of black. Single row, end it, cut it. Then I'll come back to this corner again and do a row of purple. And then finally, I'll come back to this corner again and I'll do a row of black to finish it off. And I did that same thing here after doing 3 rows of black, and this is the top side. The pink is here, the purple's on my right. I went to this corner, haven't finished them yet. I did 3 rows of black and went that way, this way, and back that way. So then I had to turn my work over, start in this corner because this was the top, and purple's in that corner. And I started a row of this green or turquoise, whatever, went to the other side, cut it. Started a row of black, went across to the other side and cut it. Started a row of blue, just the way I showed you to start a row of black. Started a row of blue, went across, cut it, and finally started a row of black and went across and cut it. And I showed you how to start by doing the slip knot, slip stitch, and the 3 chains up, and then stitching in every stitch. And I have a furry friend that wants to jump on this table. So what you need to do is, if you are doing what I'm doing, is get your 3 rows of black and then your other rows on top of it of the different colors alternating. And you need to do it on the top. You need to do it on the very bottom. And then you need to do in the center, which is the top of one and the bottom of the other, you need to add 3 rows of black on the other side of both of those strips. And I'm going to finish all that, and I'm going to tie off all the ends. Then I'll meet you back here, and I will put the top row and the bottom section together. I'm going to lay them out and measure everything to see if everything is working in the dimensions that I'm happy with before I decide I'm done, because maybe I'll put one more row of black in the middle, or maybe I'll add more colors to the top. I'm not sure. I want to see what the dimensions are. But whatever, when you finish this much, we will get back together and talk about where we're going from here. And we will, if all is well, we will put the top and the bottom layer or strip together, and I'm thinking this time I'm going to use a different method of joining. I thought if I show you two different methods, that would give you some choice. See how it looks. I think this has a little more ridge than I like. So I think I want to try something that's supposed to be a little more invisible and flat. So I want to try that for going across. So you get all of those extra rows done, as many as you want to do, and you can do more or less than I did. And then I will meet you back here for the final, well, almost the second to last step of putting this blanket all together. All right, here we are to start the second to last step of assembling this blanket. But before I get started on this step, I just want to say one thing that I neglected to mention earlier. When you are doing the 3 rows back and forth, whether they be at the edges where the other colors are coming, or if it's in the 3 rows in the middle, the first row, excuse me again, the first row will be done as I showed you. The second row, I showed you how to get started by chaining up 3 and then working every stitch back to what would be where you began the previous row. And when you get to the end of the row, remember that your very first stitch was chain 3. And so you'll be stitching into the top chain of that chain 3. And then you'll turn around and go back. And the same thing will happen at the far outside edge. Again, you'll be stitching into the top chain of the chain 3 stitch. I just wanted to remind you of that because it's very easy to miss seeing that chain 3, which serves as a stitch. And then if you don't stitch into it, when you come back, you'll lose a stitch and you'll start making narrower rows and things won't work well. So now we're here and I've taken I gotta turn this around. I've taken my 2 strips, I'm calling them, and the top strip has the pink and purple in it. And the bottom strip has the teal and blue in it. And I'm putting them together facing each other. So this is the way this stitch goes. I'm putting them face to face. I'm trying to put the middle about where the middle is. This is the middle where there's no extra colors. It's just the 3 rows of black and the 3 rows of black. And I have them facing each other. And then I go to the outside edge. And in most cases, they tell you when you're joining some squares, take 3 times the length of the square. Well, if I'm doing a 4 or 5 inch square, even a 6 inch square, I don't mind 3 times the length. But this thing is actually 37 inches across, and I should have mentioned that. And I don't want 3 times 37. I will be pulling so much yarn through. First of all, it'll take me forever, and second of all, it'll probably knot up with every stitch, and I don't need to be playing with knots. So I want to tell you that after I finished all those rows of stitching that I left you to do, and I placed it down on the floor, touching in the middle without having seamed it yet. It roughly measures 37 inches across and about 47 inches top to bottom. Now the maximum I can do is 40 across and 50 up and down. So I thought, well, that is perfect because I still want to do a border, and the border will be like 2 more rows, and that's likely to take between 1.5 and 2 inches. So I'm going to be just under the maximum allotment for Boggy Creek blanket. So I've now got my corner together, and I've decided that I want to do a whip stitch. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this when we have 2 layers of black, and I apologize for that, but I will try to describe what I'm doing. So we have the outside stitch, and I'm going to do what is called a whip stitch, and I'm going to do it in the back. Does it focus better down there? In the back loop of the stitch. So here's my outside stitch, and I'm going in the back loop, and then I'll find the outside stitch on the other side and go in the back loop, and then I'll pull my yarn through. Now I have a fair bit, but I certainly don't have 3 times 37 here. I don't even have 37 once, I don't think. Make sure to leave a tail. Then I will go in the next stitch, and this is the out. Can you see the V stitch there? There's the V stitch. There's the other half of it. Here's the back loop of it. Whoops. There's the back loop of it. And then I'll catch the stitch across. And there's the V right there. There's the V, and I'm going to take the outside. So you're taking the 2 outside loops, or they are the back loops of both if you turned the other side around in the proper way. And then again, I'm going here, the next loop, the next stitch, taking the outside loop, and then I go across here, and I get the outside loop. Yep. And I just keep pulling it. A lot of yarn here, but we just pull it. And you don't want to pull too tight, but you want it snug enough so that it holds it. And then I do, again, the outside loop of this stitch, and I go across, and I get, so you can't see the whole stitch, but there's the whole stitch right there, and I get the outside loop. So the bottom and the top, when they're facing each other. I'll be glad when I get a little farther away from the edge, so I won't keep catching that in it. Then I go to the next one. There's the outside, and then I go to this one, and there's the outside. I hope you're seeing that. And I'm going to do that all the way across. Now, I know I don't have enough yarn to go all the way across, but I mean, I'll just end off one and start another strand of yarn when this one runs out. And what I'll probably do is whatever my last stitch is, I think when I join the next yarn, I'll repeat the last stitch with the new yarn and keep going from there. That way there'll be no interruption in the seam, no worry about something coming apart or leaving a space between the stitches. If I do the last stitch again with the new yarn, make it the first stitch of the next piece of yarn. So I'm just pulling them up snug, and I'm going to go all the way across. And if I've done a good job, in other words, everything has been the same all the way along, all my stitches should line up. I should have the same number of stitches in every place so that it'll end up straight at the end. I'll do a double check in the middle, and if it's not lining up, I'll try to get it lined up at that point and go on from there. But it should be stitch for stitch the same on both sides, because I did the same thing. with each side. So I'm going to pause the video at this point. You see how I've been progressing. I'm going to pause the video at this point, and I'll join you at the end and then get us started on the next and the very last stage of assembling this blanket. See you there. Well, I made it to the far side, and as it turned out, I needed to make a join right here. I had enough yarn to go more than 1.5 squares, but I had that much left to do. And like I said, I just did the same stitch twice. Now, I will admit that it wasn't a perfect alignment. So once in the middle and once near the end, I would go in a stitch on one side and across, and then I go in the same stitch on the front side, and you could either go backwards or forwards to align it, to shift it in the direction you needed so that it came out perfect at the end. And once I did the last stitch here at the end, I went back and just repeated that last stitch so it's snug. And now I just have to tie off this end at the end at the beginning, and the two ends here in the middle. But I wanted to show you what this looks like when you turn it over. So you have these two edges butting up to each other. If you pull them apart, see, I can't even find, there's the seam. You can see the stitches in between. If you'd used a different color, you would see it. But since I used the same color, these stitches just line up next to each other, just perfect. And on the back side, what you see is where you went from one side to the other, but even though you can kind of see it, it lays perfectly flat. So, you know, I wish I had tried this on the one going up and down, but that's how it is. That's a really nice seam, and I will use it in the future. And it looks like different colors here, and I don't know why that is, because it's all the same ball of yarn, just, you know, taken from different places in the yarn. When you shift it, the color seems, oh, I know, we're in a shadow. That's why it looks different. So everything is together now. I just have 4 ends to tie off, and then I'll be back to show you the very last step, which is to put a border around it. And I'm just going to do a very plain double crochet all the way around. So be back shortly. All right, we're back again to finish off our blanket. By now, if you've been following me, you have your 2 colors of border on the bottom, and you have your 2 colors of border on the top, along with some rows of black. And then in the middle, you would have 3 rows and 3 rows. And the last thing we did was to join the top and the bottom section, and that gave us a very nice flat seam. I was really happy with that, and I wish I had done it on the seam going up and down, doesn't quite seem to be straight, but there will be one finishing step after this. So now it's time to put the border on, and I'm going to the very bottom corner, and I want to start near an edge so we can talk about what to do along here. So I'm going to start at the very bottom, because when it joins up, I'd rather the join be at the bottom than somewhere else. Now, I did start it once, and I took it out because I do not have enough of this yarn to go all the way through and do one border. And maybe when I'm done, I may decide to do 2, go around twice, and that'll be totally up to you. how many times you go around. And I did it to start with. I used a double crochet. I didn't go very far when I decided that. I really didn't want a double crochet, which is what the whole blanket is used making double crochets. I decided I'm going to border it with a half double crochet. So I'm picking up my yarn and I'm not using the knot, the slip knot. I'm just, if I can grab a hold of it, I'm just pulling the yarn through. Make sure I have enough for a tail. And I'm going to do one chain here, one chain. And then I'm going to start in the next space doing half double crochets. Yarn over and then go all through all 3 of the loops on your hook for those that may be fairly new to crochet. So I'm just going to do every stitch, half double crochets, working around. And I also, want half doubles. I also tried out a couple of things in the corner, and the corners are not going to be easy to work through. A lot of yarn in some of the corners because that's where our tails were that had to be woven in, and that often makes the corner very thick. So here we are at the corner, and I'm going in. I see a space, it's a bit tight, and I'm doing a half double crochet. Then I'm going to do a chain 2 and another half double crochet in that same space, and that'll give us a turn in the corner. Now here's the part that some will have problems with. It's not my favorite part, but it's working up the sides of the rows where we did the individual colors. And technically they say put 2 stitches in for every double crochet. I don't think we're going to be able to do quite that many. There'll be some that we can and some that we can't. And we're going to just go in where we can find a space. Again, I have to remember I'm doing half double crochets. Wherever we can find a space. So there's a space there. I used to try to go into the stitch, but I can see that isn't necessarily going to be possible here. A lot of times you'll have to go around the stitch. So I'll go in there. And then I'll go around. I'm going to go through this one if I can. A little bit hard, but I got through. It's, whatever feels like it's going to work. That's the best advice I can give you. I see a space right here, so I'm going to go into that. Do a half double crochet. And then there's another space here. Half double crochet. Space here. Space here. Oops, I'm doing a single again. And in here. Sometimes it's really tight and sometimes it works real easy. And my wool is, I don't know if I mentioned, I'm using a different wool, so I don't really see a difference in the color, which is good. There is a bit of a difference in the feel. This one I'm using right now is much softer than the last one I used, but I don't think it's going to be terribly noticeable. So in here, just wherever we can find a space is really in here. And in here. A lot of blanket here. Working on a table is a bit helpful. And down below here. And now we're in to the very corner of this original square. So I'll go in there. And then remember that stitch right there. Go in there. And once I've done that one, then it's smooth sailing until we get to the middle. Because you're going into the stitches that go up the side of your square. And you'll continue doing half double crochets all the way around. When you get to this middle, you'll do it the same way as you did when you went across the top where the two squares were joined. And this might be a little bit easier because the join was a little flatter and not bulky. So you'll be able to go right into that join. So you're going to do a row of half double crochets all the way around the entire blanket. Now, because most of the way you're going up the side where you already have black, it will probably look like enough. I'll do a few more and we'll have a look at it. The only place that it looks like it really could use more, and you'll have to decide if you're happy with it or not. I'm still doing half double crochets here, but my yarn is getting tight. I think I told you earlier that I had done a measurement on this after I joined it all. I'm not sure, maybe I didn't. But when I measured it after I did the joins and everything, it measured 37 across by about 47 long. And the maximums for a Boggy Creek blanket is 40 by 50. So I think doing one, and even since I'm doing half doubles, even doing 2 rows will fit, but I'll measure it after one. But if you look at this, this looks fine with the 1 row finishing it off. The only place you may not be happy with it is here. Right here, when you're going along the ends, it may look like it should have more. And if that bothers you enough, then do another round. If it doesn't really bother you, that's not much black, then let it go, because most of the blanket is going to be these squares, and that 1 round of border will be enough to finish it off. So I'm going to finish going all the way around. Then I'm going to take a look at it lying out flat on the floor so I can see it all, and I'm going to measure it and determine if I want a second row or not. I suspect I'll be happy with just the 1 row going around. But there is one more step to really making this a finished, decent project, and that is to block it. Now, I don't typically block blankets, although I don't make blankets too often. And when I do block something, I generally block scarves, my fashion scarves, and shawls. Those are the items I block, or a wrap. And I block them by soaking them in a sink of water with some soak or eucalyptus. Then I wrap them in a towel and I squeeze out just as much of the water as I possibly can. And then I take them up and I block them on, I don't have the actual blocking boards. What I have are those puzzle mats for children, and I put a towel on them, and then I block them on that. Now, this blanket needs to be blocked because I'm sure it's a little harder for you to see, but I am going to try to move this up. And just lay the blanket out. It doesn't lay out well. It has puckers in it. It doesn't, the squares don't sit flat. They have ripples in them. And I really want this to look decent because I don't know if you can see how that is not going flat. It's buckling over here. See that? That's why this blanket has to be blocked. And it has to do with making squares. Apparently it's a common thing that when you make a square, your tension changes as you move out. I don't know. So what I am going to do, and I will try to take a picture if I can, I'm actually going to block this out as square as I can on the floor, on my mats. I have quite a few of them. Block it the best I can to get it pulled out and square. And then I am going to get a squirt bottle of water. I'm not going to soak it first. I'm going to block it dry. And then I'm going to get a squirt bottle of water and squirt it, and it apparently will then lay flat. Now, it is acrylic, so I don't think acrylic is known for blocking very well. But I am going to try that because I want to get these buckles out of my squares. So that's the last step to finishing your blanket or Afghan. And I want to thank you for joining me. I know it was kind of confusing the way I did this tutorial, but I hope you were able to follow along. And if you want to do it different, use some of my suggestions for altering it to make a blanket that is your own creation. But once again, thank you for joining me. I hope it wasn't too confusing, and good luck with your blanket.